The folder had no markings on the outside, and that was how you knew. Inside the Grand Assembly tier, every surface was pale compressed mineral walls that had been built to carry sound upward, toward the gallery, toward the 1,000 delegates who sat above the floor. The chamber was designed to diminish whoever stood at the center of it. That was the point. The architects who drew these plans had understood something important. You could control a species more completely by making them feel small than by threatening them directly. Archivist Kale Undrath was human. He was not small. But the floor was 20 meters below the nearest gallery rail, and the ceiling above him was 60, and when he placed the folder on the reading surface, it made almost no sound at all.
6 pages.
11 years in the making. One executed ambassador, and the document was finally here.
He did not look up.
Every delegate had been seated for 40 minutes before Undrath walked to the floor. Standard procedure. The Thavine Dominion had called the session, a routine matter they had filed relating to trade corridor confirmation. 43 species present. Translation running in real time through the embedded systems at each seat. The sovereign of the Dominion sat in the elevated position to the east of the gallery, amber chitin plating catching the light from the overhead strips, 4 outer eyes open, which was unusual. He had come prepared to be bored. He had come wearing the expression of someone who has attended this kind of meeting for 40 years, and expects to attend 40 more. Then Undrath placed the folder on the reading surface. No institutional marking on the cover, no seal, no symbol of the species that had prepared it, just standard-weight polymer in a room where everything else was engraved, stamped, or embossed with the marks of belonging. One object that looked like nothing at all. 90 seconds in, every delegate understood what was happening. The translation systems ran clean. Each page read clearly to every species present. Undrath read without inflection, not because he felt nothing, but because the document did not need his feeling. The document had been written for rhythm. He had written the final draft himself. He could feel the structure of each sentence land where it was supposed to land, one after another, 60 words apart.
Page 3, the first advisor stood.
He did not run, he did not make a sound. He moved toward the exit the way people move when they have communications to begin, not fleeing but beginning. Another followed. Then a third, moving to the opposite exit, already reaching for the device at their hip.
The sovereign watched every page.
His outer eyes did not close. His posture did not shift. His hands rested on the rail in front of his seat, and he held them there through page 4, through page 5, and through the opening lines of page 6, and what page 6 named was what he would lose. No argument rose from the floor, no challenge, no sound at all. Undrath closed the folder. He set both hands flat on the reading surface. He looked up at the gallery for the first time.
11 seconds of silence. Not shock record.
What he was about to read had been written 11 years ago. The sovereign had no idea. Stay with me. 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days earlier, Geneva. The building had no signage. The elevator required a physical key, not a code, not a scan, a cut metal key that one of the 5 people who used this elevator carried on a ring with no other keys. The hallway on the 4th floor had 3 offices and a shared space that served as both meeting room and kitchen, and the only item anyone had brought from home was the coffee machine. It sat on the counter beside the window that looked out at a gray February sky, and it had been there long enough that the brand text on the side had rubbed off.
This was the office that did not appear on any registry.
Director Win Asara was reading when Undrath arrived. She was at the table, not the desk. She preferred the table when she was working through something difficult, because the desk had a drawer and the drawer had a photograph, and when she was at the desk she sometimes opened the drawer and looked at the photograph instead of working, and she had learned not to do that in the morning. She was reading the same paragraph she had read 3 times before. Her lips moved slightly on the 3rd read-through.
That was how you knew she had found the thing that wasn't right yet.
She was holding a pen, standard ballpoint, the kind that costs almost nothing. The grip was worn smooth from use, not the rubberized section at the bottom, but the full barrel, worn to skin smooth by the particular way she held it. The brand name on the clip was past reading. She had never tried to read it. She looked up when Undrath came in, set the pen down and said, "The filing window opens at 800.
"I know," he said. She picked the pen back up.
Kale Undrath was the team's archivist, which meant in practice that he carried the memory of every agreement, every compact, every bilateral clause that the Thavine Dominion had signed in the past 190 years. He read documents aloud before filing them, not to memorize them, but for rhythm. A document that read poorly in sound was a document with a structural problem somewhere. He kept 3 colors of annotation marks, black for legal cross-reference, red for rhythmic correction, green for the places where the language was doing something the drafters might not have noticed. His handwriting looked like typeset. Other people found this unsettling. He did not notice. He sat down across from Asara, set his bag on the table and took out a folder. Not the folder, that one had been written already, sealed, and placed in a case that required 2 keys from 2 people to open. This was the day's working materials. He uncapped a red marker.
The notification reads clearly, he said. It reads clearly in Thavine, in Pelion, and in the standard conclave translation format.
Good, Asara said. The rhythm on page 3 is still wrong. I am going to fix it.
Fix it after 800.
He recapped the marker. He placed it on the table parallel to the folder's edge. That was a habit too. He arranged things in parallel when he was waiting, something to do with patience that expressed itself in geometry. The other 3 arrived within the next 20 minutes. LT Ran Asan came first, already carrying 2 tablets, one in each hand, both active. He was the team's commercial infrastructure officer, which in practice meant he spent 3 years embedding access protocols into trade systems that no one had asked him to embed them into, and then waiting. He had a habit of checking counts twice. He would look at a number, look away, look back, verify. Not doubt exactly. More like respect for the fact that numbers could change between the first look and the second. Dr. Mari's Korith came second. She was the team's diplomatic contact specialist, which meant she had spent 11 years maintaining a log, 847 entries, updated every quarter whether anything changed or not. She kept the log because the routine was the weapon. You don't build a record in 11 months. You build it in 11 years, entry by entry, in a room no one is watching. And then one morning the record is complete and the room is still quiet and nothing about the work has changed except that it is done.
Odishe Neva Karath came last.
She was 26 years old and this was her 3rd posting, and no one who knew her 3rd posting from the outside would have recognized it as a posting at all. She had a habit of closing things, container lids, cabinet doors, open drawers, not because she was tidy, but because open things bothered her in a way she had never explained to anyone and didn't plan to. She had smooth, close-cropped hair and kept her hands level when she was carrying something she cared about, and she did not volunteer opinions unless someone asked for one, and sometimes not even then. Asara looked around the table. 5 people, 1 coffee machine, a key on a ring with no other keys.
Stage overview, she said. This was not the first time they had reviewed it.
They reviewed it once a year every year for 11 years. The review never changed. The plan had 7 stages. Stages 1 through 3 required no military asset, no diplomatic summit, no public communication of any kind. Stage 4 was the coalition phase. Stage 5 was the filing. Stage 6 was the legal contest. Stage 7 had 3 sentences, all classified, and Asara had written them herself and had not reread them since because she had not needed to. She knew what they said.
Everyone at the table knew what they said. She did not need to read a thing twice to know what it cost. We wait for activation, she said.
We've been waiting 11 years, Korith said, not a complaint, a fact. We've been doing 11 years of work, Asara said.
That is different.
She picked up the pen, set it down again. Then they had 11 years to not do this. No one responded, there was nothing to respond to, they went back to work. The wait had a texture to it that was difficult to explain to someone who had not lived it. It was not anxious. Anxiety requires uncertainty about the outcome, and everyone in that room had spent 11 years making the outcome less uncertain. The wait was more like maintenance, the steady, unspectacular work of keeping a machine in condition for the day it would need to run. Korith's log, updated on the 15th of each quarter whether anything changed or not. The budget reauthorizations, filed under a cover designation that had been chosen specifically because it was boring. Undraft's rhythm checks, red marker, parallel edges, documents read aloud in a room with no audience.
And once a year, the assembly.
Once a year, all 5 of them in the same room, going through the stage overview, asking whether anything needed adjustment, finding usually that nothing did, and then going back to their separate work for another year. The coffee machine was always on. The February sky was usually gray. The key was on the ring with no other keys. Karath had joined in year 3. She had been posted as an attaché to the Earth Diplomatic Liaison Office, a real posting, with real duties that she performed completely and without error, and the second posting, the one that mattered, had been added to it 6 weeks after she arrived. She had been told very little. She had asked very few questions. What she understood was this: a record was being built, a machine was being maintained, and her job was to be present when it ran. The annual review in year 8. She was the one who noticed that the Davaran Elder Chamber had filed a formal complaint under a compact law clause that matched a clause in the document exactly. She flagged it to Korith. Korith added it to the log, entry 609. On Aseldra Prime, the session calendar was maintained by a small administrative office in the Dominion's Sovereign Governance Directorate. Ambassador Yelm Karath had been assigned to the standing liaison post, a role that required attending sessions, monitoring trade corridor discussions, and filing reports. She had been doing it for 13 years. She was good at it, she was thorough. She had never given anyone reason to watch her more carefully than they watched anyone else because there was nothing to watch. She did her job, she attended sessions, she filed reports. On the morning of the 44th session of the Dominion's current governance cycle, she arrived early. She set her bag on the table in the liaison preparation room. She had 41 pages of trade data, 4 precedent cases, and a thermos of tea, dark, no sugar. She placed the thermos on the corner of the table where she always placed it. She opened her materials. She smoothed the first page flat with 2 fingers at the top corners. The session would cover trade corridor confirmation for the next cycle, standard matters. She had attended 11 sessions like this one. She had 41 pages. She did not reach page 2. The gallery doors opened at the scheduled time. The delegates filed in. Kareth walked to the floor level. The liaison position was at the left side of the reading area, not the center, and she stood at the marked position, and she smoothed her jacket at the lapel, a habit, and then she waited for the session to be called to order. It was called to order. The first item on the agenda was trade corridor confirmation. The second item listed in the session documentation as diplomatic status review, standing matter, was called 4 minutes into the session. Kareth was still holding her materials. She had not yet needed them. The Sovereign's representative spoke for 37 seconds. The execution order was filed under Compact Law Provision 7.4, which allows the Sovereign to remove a diplomatic representative whose presence is determined to be contrary to Dominion interests. The provision had been used 6 times in the Dominion's history. The process takes 4 seconds once the filing is confirmed. It requires no secondary approval. Kareth was in the transit corridor outside the session chamber. She had not gone in. Her job was not to be in the room. Her job was to be outside it, and when the word came, to send one word back. She was holding the thermos. She always carried it to the sessions because Kareth always forgot water, and Kareth always forgot that she would forget, and then one of them would end up thirsty. She adjusted the lid and checked the seal. A 3-second habit she performed before every session without thinking about it. Then the gallery doors opened from inside, and the sound from the chamber reached the corridor, and the sound was applause. She knew what the applause meant. Secondary hand ridges striking chest plates, the Dominion's standard expression of formal approval. 9 seconds of it steady and rhythmic. She counted, the way she always counted things without deciding to. She did not look at the gallery doors. She was already closing her hand around the thermos. She took out the authentication device, entered the word, sent it. 1 word from a transit corridor to 5 screens in a building that didn't appear on any registry. She did not know if anyone was listening. She knew the machine was. The word arrived on all 5 screens simultaneously. Kareth saw it first. She was at her terminal when the notification landed, not because she had been watching for it, but because she was always at her terminal. She had been updating the log, entry 848. She had started typing it before the word arrived, and she finished the sentence she was typing before she looked at the screen fully. Asun was checking account. He looked at his screen, looked away, looked back, verified. Then he set both tablets down, which was the first time anyone at the office had seen him set both tablets down at the same time. Undrath was reading aloud. He stopped mid-sentence, placed the document flat on the table, smoothed it with 2 fingers at the top corners parallel to the edge, then he was still. Karen, analyst, the team's legal cross-reference specialist, had been at the window. He turned around. His hands went still first, then the rest of him. Asara was at the table. She had been rereading the same paragraph for the 4th time. Her lips were moving. She stopped. She picked up the pen. She set her left hand flat on the document to steady it. With her right hand, she drew the cap of the pen straight back, no twist, just straight back, and she signed the activation order. 4 seconds to sign. She recapped the pen before she set it down. They had 11 years to not do this, she said. We used all 11. No one responded. They were already moving. Round 1 was legal. Undrath filed 11 simultaneous challenges. The Dominion's legal framework permitted challenges of this type under 17 different compact law provisions, and Undrath had spent 3 years finding all 17 and mapping them against the 847 bilateral agreements the Dominion had signed with other species since the convocation of 2074. 11 challenges were not the maximum he could have filed. 11 was the number he needed to trigger the threshold. He had verified this 23 times. He read each notification aloud before sending it, for rhythm. The Dominion's legal office received the filings at 9:12. They had 4 staff members qualified to respond to challenges of this type. They had never had more than 2 active at one time. The previous record was 2 in a session 7 years ago, and that session had taken 11 months to resolve. They had 11 actives. The count was 4,312,880. No argument was filed in the first hour. No counter notification, no formal acknowledgement, just 4 people in a room looking at 11 filings, and the number was not going down. Round 2 was commercial. No warships moved, no soldiers scrambled, no alarm of any kind. Asun activated 3 years of embedded access at 9:47. The access protocols ran clean. He had tested them quarterly for 3 years, in isolated segments, never the full sequence, because the full sequence would have been visible. Now the full sequence ran, and what it did was flag. In the first 6 hours, 4.3 million contracts across 16 species flagged for clause-specific review. The flags were automated. The notifications were specific. Each one named a clause, named the relevant compact law provision, and named the agreement under which the clause had been filed. Anonymous, irrefutable, unignorable. Asun checked the count. He looked at the number 4,312,880, looked away, corrected one digit the final count had updated during the access sequence, and looked back. Then he closed the terminal. In 6 days, the Dominion's primary exchange corridor would drop 28%. 16 species would pause shipments, not in protest. In process, their own compliance systems would flag the pauses automatically because the clauses were real, the provisions were active, and the agreements had never been formally reviewed. The machine was running, no one had fired a weapon, no one had raised their voice. The document was faster than 1,900 warships. It always had been. Dr. Mari's Korath placed the first of 9 calls at 11:03. She did not begin with arguments, she began with names. This was a choice she had made 11 years ago, before she had ever placed a call in this capacity, before she had finished building the log, before she knew which names she would be calling. You do not open a call like this by explaining what you want. You open it by saying the name of the person who was hurt. That was the record. That was what the log had always been for, not a list of grievances, but a list of names, each one attached to a date and a place and a 4-sentence summary that said, "This happened, and we noted it, and we have been noting it for a long time." She opened the log, 847 entries. She picked up the call. The Davaran Elder Chamber responded in 40 minutes. 40 minutes was fast. Korath had estimated 2 hours. She was still rereading her notes from the first call when the response came in, and she looked at the timestamp twice before she believed it. The elder on the call was named Vethsal N. Orvan. She was 160 years old. She had the particular stillness of someone who has been in difficult conversations for so long that stillness had become her natural state. Not patience, exactly, but the kind of quiet that forms when you've stopped expecting things to be easy and started simply watching what they are. Korath said the name of the 2264 convocation incident, entry 412 in the log, not in any official record, not filed under any compact law provision. A private injury carried for 62 years by the Davaran Elder Chamber and never formally placed anywhere because there had been no mechanism to place it. 4 seconds of silence on the call. "We have had this entry in our formal record for 62 years, Orvan said. Korath waited. "We have been waiting for someone who remembered." A pause. Long enough that Korath thought the call had dropped. Then, "We thought it would take you longer." The Pelian Conclave took 3 hours to respond, which was faster than their fastest formal deliberation on record. The delegate who called back was a junior trade officer who had been given the task of reviewing the clause notifications. He had passed them to a senior member, who had passed them to a council elder, who had gone personally to the archive and pulled trade ledgers spanning 2 centuries and found at the back of one of them a clause that matched. An annotation next to it, in handwriting over 100 years old, read, "Unresolved pending mechanism." The mechanism had arrived. When the call connected, the delegate performed a double blink, the Pelian formal acknowledgement for receiving something long owed. He did not explain it. He did not need to. 7 species co-signed within 58 hours. Earth had not recruited them. Earth had built the record, placed the calls, named the names, and the others had been waiting with their own records, their own logs, their own entries from sessions that had never had anywhere to go. The coalition was not built on shared power. It was built on shared injury and a legal mechanism that had not existed until now. Korath wrote entry 848 in the log, then entry 849, then she stopped counting and wrote each one as it came. Vethsal and Orvan called back on the morning of day 3. Korath put the call through to Asara's office. Asara was at the desk, not the table, which meant she had opened the drawer already that morning and looked at the photograph and put it back, and now she was at the desk because she had decided the morning required the desk. "I have a question," Orvan said, "that my chamber asked me to bring to you directly." "Go ahead," Asara said. "Entry 412 in your log, the 2264 incident. You named it by its Davaran designation, not the Dominion catalog number, not the standard reference. The Davaran name." A pause. "Where did you learn the Davaran names?" "Entry 412 was filed under the Davaran name in our log," Asara said. "That is the name of the event. We used the correct name." Another pause, 4 seconds. The particular weight of an elder who is processing something unexpected. "We have never told anyone the Davaran name," Orvan said. "No," Asara said, "you hadn't."
A longer silence this time. Then someone was listening, Orvan said, before you began. The log has 847 entries, Asara said. We were always listening. Round 5 arrived on day 6. The Dominion contested all 11 filings. Their legal office had brought in 12 additional staff, the largest emergency legal expansion in the Dominion's recent history, and they had worked without breaks for 5 days, and they had managed to build responses to 9 of the 11 challenges. They won 5 solid wins, well argued, filed correctly. 5 of the 11 challenges were dismissed. They lost 6. The 6 losses were clean, complete, and this was the part that took the Dominion's legal team another 12 hours to fully understand. Each of the 6 losses exceeded the threshold for Stage 7 activation by double. Not barely over, double. Undrath had not filed the 11 challenges to win 11. He had filed them knowing which 5 the Dominion could win and which 6 they could not. The ones they could win were real challenges, properly filed, properly argued, genuinely close, because if any of the 6 had looked like intentional losses, the Dominion's legal team might have found the pattern. The ones they could not win were the ones he had spent 11 years making certain they could not win. The legal machine did not fail. It ran exactly as it had been built to run. Korith was at her terminal when the final ruling came in. She typed the entry. She set her hands on the table. She looked at the count for a long time without updating anything. Then she walked to Asara's office and said one word, 6. Karen's hands went still. He had been at the window, the same window Asan had stood at the morning the word arrived, and when Korith said 6, he turned around, and his hands went still first, then everything else. He looked at Asara. He said, Stage 7. Asara was at the table. She had been rereading the activation clause, lips moving. She stopped. She picked up the pen. She did not uncap it. She held it for 3 seconds, her left hand flat on the table, her right hand around the barrel. Then she put the pen in her breast pocket. She stood up. She walked out. No one else moved for a moment. The pen had signed the original authorization. It had signed the activation order. Both times it had been uncapped, both times the cap had been replaced immediately after. This was the first time she had pocketed it without opening it. Something had already been done that could not be undone. What the pen carried now was different. The transport to Aseldra Prime left at 400. Undrath was already packed. He had been packed since day 2, not from certainty but from habit. He kept a travel case in the corner of his office that was always ready. He said once when someone asked that he found it easier to think when he knew he could move. No one had asked him again. He carried one bag and one folder. The folder had a standard weight polymer cover, no institutional marking on the outside. He had made that choice deliberately, not as a statement, but because the document did not need a symbol. It was what it was, that was enough. The transit took 19 hours. He spent them reading the declaration aloud. Not to practice, he had written the final draft. He knew the rhythm. He read it because reading it aloud was how he moved from working on something to carrying it, and this was the last chance to carry it before it became record. The Grand Assembly tier looked the same as it always looked. Pale compressed mineral walls. Gallery rails 60 meters above the floor. The overhead strip lights indirect, designed to illuminate without warmth. The embedded translation systems at each delegate seat running on a 40-millisecond delay. Undrath walked to the speaker's position. He had stood in this chamber twice before as a witness, once as a junior archivist filing a procedural note. He had never stood at the center. The floor was the same floor. The walls were the same walls. The chamber's purpose, to diminish the person standing at the center of it, had not changed. He placed the folder on the reading surface. He opened it to the first page. He smoothed it flat with 2 fingers at the top corners. He straightened it on the reading surface until the top edge ran parallel to the edge of the surface. A habit, everything in parallel. He did not look up as he began readings. The Declaration of Structural Review under the compact law provisions of the 2074 Convocation was 6 pages. It had been written in 3 drafts. The first draft was Asara's, plain, exact, without decoration. The second was a joint revision by Korith and the Coalition legal contacts. The third was Undrath's, not for content but for rhythm. He had not changed a single substantive word. He had changed 12 sentences to make them land where they needed to land. 90 seconds in, every delegate understood. The translation systems ran without error. The gallery, 43 species, every seat filled, was very still. The sovereign sat in the elevated position to the east. Amber chitin plating, 4 outer eyes open, hands resting on the rail. He had come to a routine session. He had not been told what was filed. The Dominion's legal team had been working under emergency conditions for 5 days and no one had briefed him, and he was learning what it said at the same time as everyone else. He watched every page. Page 3, the first advisor stood.
Moved toward the exit, not running, already reaching for the device at his hip, beginning the communications that could not wait. He watched page 1, he watched page 3, he watched page 6, the page that named what he would lose. Page 4, a second advisor. Page 5, 2 more moving toward opposite exits. 4 advisors remained in the gallery by the time Undrath reached the final clause. The walls of the assembly tier carried sound upward. Voices from the floor reached the gallery clearly. Voices from above blurred on the way down. Undrath's voice reached every seat in the gallery without effort, without volume, without performance. He read at the same pace he always read. The document had been written for this pace. It arrived exactly where it was built to arrive.
Page 6.
The final clause, 3 border systems. Structural review notice. Neighbors already notified, per the compact law provision requiring notification before formal filing, a provision the Dominion's architects had written into the framework 190 years ago and never needed to use. The weapon had always been in the agreements. They simply hadn't needed to read them. Undrath closed the folder. He set both hands flat on the reading surface. He looked up at the gallery for the first time. The gallery was silent. Not the silence of people who don't know what to say. The silence of people who are recording what they just heard because they understand that they are present at something that will not be repeated.
11 seconds.
The Sovereign said nothing. He had not moved since page 3. His hands were still on the rail. His outer eyes were still open. He was watching the floor, watching the human archivist who stood at the center of a chamber designed to diminish him, watching the closed folder on the reading surface. His advisors were gone. His exchange corridor was down 28%. 7 species had co-signed a document that invoked 847 bilateral agreements his own government had signed and never reviewed. He was still on his throne. The throne no longer meant what it had meant when he sat down. He was present for every second of it. He said nothing. He watched it. They had 11 years to not do this, Undrath said, quietly, not to the gallery, not to the Sovereign, to the room, to the record. The room heard it. The silence continued for 11 seconds. Exactly 11. Korath had told Undrath once that she kept counting in every difficult meeting and she had never known why. He had thought about that for a year before he understood. The count is not anxiety, the count is how you prove you were there. In the gallery, one delegate leaned to another and said something too quiet for the translation system to catch. The other answered. Later, what the answer had been would travel. That depends on what their neighbors decide to remember. Geneva received the final filing confirmation at 3:17. Carrand was the one watching. He had been watching since the transport left. He logged the timestamp in the operations log 1 entry, the final one, and he sat very still for 3 seconds. His hands were flat on the table. Then he said to no one in particular, "Stage 7 complete." He did not raise his voice. Korath was on the first transport back. She had the thermos with her. She had carried it to the session and she had carried it home and she had not opened it. The tea inside would be cold. It had been cold since the morning of the session, since the moment she adjusted the lid in the transit corridor and heard the applause and sent the word. She had not opened it because there was no reason to open it. The thermos had done what it had done. She placed it on Asara's desk without ceremony. Asara was at the desk. She looked at the thermos. She picked it up. It weighed the same as it always weighed. A cold thermos full carried a long way without being opened. She held it for a moment. Then she placed it on the shelf behind her at the left end, where there was space. She reached into her breast pocket. She took out the pen. She looked at it for a moment. The barrel worn smooth from the grip to the top of the cap, the clip still attached. The brand name worn past reading. She had never tried to read it. That had never seemed like the relevant thing about the pen. She placed it on the shelf beside the thermos. Not down the way you set something aside. Beside, level, parallel to the thermos, parallel to the shelf edge, the way Undrath always arranged things when he was waiting. She was not waiting. She was placing something where it belonged. The card had been in her jacket pocket since the morning the authentication word was sent.
38 names.
Every human diplomat who had been lost since first contact. Not all of them to the Dominion, some to other species, other sessions, other compact law provisions that had gone the wrong way. All of them to the work of being present in rooms where the decisions happened, doing the job of standing in front of species that were larger and older and more powerful, filing reports, smoothing pages flat, carrying thermoses of tea, and sometimes not coming home.
She sat down at the desk.
The office was empty, that was the point. A record read aloud to no one is still a record. She had learned that from Korath. She read each name aloud, all 38 of them. She did not rush. She did not add anything to the names, no titles, no dates, no 4-sentence summaries. Just the names, one by one, the way you read a list when the list is the thing itself, and nothing else needs to be said. When she was done, she set the card on the desk. She heard Orvan before she saw her, the particular sound of a Davaran elder's movement, careful and deliberate in the corridor outside. Orvan appeared in the doorway. She did not come in. She looked at the office, at the desk, at the card, then at Asara. "What do humans call what you just did?" she asked. Asara thought for 3 seconds. "Patience," she said, "though that's not quite right. Patience means waiting. We were never waiting." Orvan was still for a moment. "No," she said, "I see that now." She left. Asara sat at the desk for a while. She did not open the drawer. Outside, the sky was gray, February again, or something like February. The particular gray that appeared when a long thing was finished and the next long thing had not yet begun. The thermos stood on the shelf. The pen lay beside it, barrel worn smooth, cap in place, brand name past reading. The card with 38 names was flat on the desk.